Hello and welcome to this Kerbal Space Program Let's Play video. Today we are going to land a Kerbal on the moon and return him safely. But you know what, there's been a lot of videos that do that, so we're going to do this Apollo style, with a separate lander and then a lunar rendezvous. But you know what, even that's been done a lot, so we're going to do this entire thing in IVA. Every step of the way is going to be cockpit only. The couple times when we have to leave the cockpit to go in chase view, to go into chase view, for example, EVA, we're going to turn off the HUD so that I don't get any extra information. Anything that a Kerbal wouldn't see from the cockpit, we don't get to use. So, unfortunately, that means the video is not that visually interesting, because a lot of it is staring at the controls. So I've sped it up a lot from a mission that was originally over an hour long. The video should only be about 25 minutes, so sped up quite a bit for you. So getting into orbit initially with only the cockpit, you kind of need to know your rocket already. So the rocket I designed burns straight up to the standard 10K, rolls over to 90 degrees until the first stage burns out, separate, roll over to 90, 180 degrees in a 90 degree orientation, burn until the stage burns out. There's no other way really to do it. Trying to guess, at this speed I'll roll over to this orientation, it's going to way too many unknowns in your final orbit. It's going to be kind of messed up. Doesn't mean you can't fix it, but it's just a pain in the neck. Okay, so you can see we're just about burning out the second stage, and there it goes. We're gonna zoom in. Yep, see the escape tower gets jettisoned. Then we're gonna jettison that stage. Unfortunately, you can't really see it. You just staging list on the left. You can tell what happened. Then we're just gonna coast to Apotheosis. Now, it's important to keep track of your altitude dial, because once it rolls over to 100,000, there's no way of... It rolls back over, so you kind of have to keep track. If I went to 300,000 meters, or 300 kilometers without paying attention, I'd be completely screwed. I wouldn't know where I was in space. That's going to be really important later on when we get to the moon. Anyway, so I'm circularizing. I have this whole table of figures in an Excel sheet. We're punching my current speed to get what I should be to get a circular orbit. Not too interesting. I'll include it in the Reddit post for this, so anyone wants to, they can play around with it. So then I spend the next few minutes in-game just kind of getting a stable orbit around 100 kilometers. That's more important when you're in IVA, because to get the translunar injection just right so that you don't miss the moon, and more importantly, so you don't slam into the moon, you really need to know how much delta V to put in. You need to know what your final velocity after your injection burn is, and that's going to depend on your thrust ratio. It's all crazy, but it really, really helps if your actual attempt in IVA is started from the same orbit that your practice runs did. And make no mistake, there were a bunch of practice runs with the chase cam to know exactly how long to burn from a certain altitude once the moon appears. So that's what I'm doing now. It's just, we're orbiting Kerbal, we're waiting for the moon to show up. I've rotated norths because these side windows are a lot bigger, so it's a lot easier to keep more of... you can see more of the horizon. You don't have to constantly adjust as much. So we just saw the moon, adjust to prograde. And now we are going to do the translunar injection. So I'm sorry if the video gets a little bit jumpy. I sped the section up. All the sections are sped up in the video, but it does mean at places it gets jumpy where it looked fine when I was doing it, and then fast forward, fivefold, it's a little bit jumpy. Sorry if I caused any headaches. So, as I mentioned earlier, when this burn ends, or I cut this burn out when I hit a specific orbital velocity. Now, you can't kind of slow down and approach it, because as you move away from Kerbin, you slow down. Um, so this is really, you have to burn full throttle until you hit the exact speed that you've previously plotted. I suppose I could have timed my burns too in the practice runs, but I just instead decided to hit a specific orbital velocity. In hindsight, timing probably would have been a more precise way to do it. Anyway, so you can see there we've ejected the landing stage. So we're doing our first IVA rendezvous. It's actually not that hard with targeting mode, as it turns out. I was very happy. If you know it's easiest if you know the orientation of the thing you're trying to dock with, in which case we do. We just separated from it, so we just needed to roll 180 degrees, make sure it's set as target, and then you just have to line up your heading, the target indicator, which is the purple one, and your prograde indicator. As long as those three things are all lined up and you know you're along the same heading, you're going to dock. No issues. That said, we are taking it very slowly. We're not, I mean, clearly we're moving forward. In chase cam, in the chase view, you see it gets down to 0.1 meters per second. In the cockpit, it's only 1. So unfortunately, there is a bug. If the decoupler, if the engine is attached directly to the docking mechanism, you can't, the engine fairing won't go away. So we had to briefly pop out to the Space Center and then re-enter our craft to get that graphical glitch to be fixed. We didn't look at anything, just straight Space Center and back just to fix the glitch. So now that we've docked, our forward view is a little bit blocked, but we're just on a translunar injection right now, so I'm looking for the moon just so we can see it approaching. As it turns out, I rolled the wrong way. I should have realized. You can see the injection stage there. Okay, sped the video up, and now we're approaching the moon. So we're coming up on the moon, and this is the part that's a little bit tricky. So I was actually aiming for the leading edge in the moon. I'm coming in at the trailing edge, which means if I had burned just a little bit longer, instead of being able to go into an orbit, I would have been headed right at the surface. And I'd be lying if I didn't say that's happened a few times tonight. Anyway, so go until we hit periapsis, which we know again when we switch from descending to ascending. Actually, hang on, I lost my place in the video. Recording this after the fact. So I'm going around, I'm trying to circularize, that's what I'm doing right now. We had the injection burn. Now we're just circling a couple times. I want to get a nice low orbit because my moonlander doesn't actually have that much extra fuel. So if I don't get the CSM low enough, my fuel margin isn't really good enough to be doing a lot of messing around, rendezvousing, at the same time getting to a really high orbit. So, here we are. Okay, so this burn right now, just killing off a little bit of velocity to get down. You can see the, where are we? Yeah, we're about 17 kilometers. Keep going back to the Excel sheet. So honestly, this is the most nerve-wracking part of the entire trip, honestly, is getting into a stable, low lunar orbit. It's the most tricky part. It really is. Anyway, so we turned off the HUD so we don't get any extra information. Now we're sending Jebediah over to the LM. Now, I designed this thing, it's not meant to be efficient, it's kind of ugly. Really what I just wanted, I wanted to be two-stage, so this is what I wound up with. And who do I send over? I think I sent Bill. Then the other Kerbal will stay behind. Alright, so coming over, boarding. Alright, and now we're going back inside the cockpit. Now I have a list. I have assigned action groups to undock. You see we just undocked, I believe. Yep, engaged RCS. And we're going to back up a little bit so we can view the LM from the CSM window. There they go. Alright, we're going to switch over to the LM. Okay, we're inside the cockpit view. Now we can bring the HUD back, so we're not going to accidentally get extra information. Now, you notice here we don't even have any sort of altimeter. We have the radar, we have the radar altimeter, and that's it. So I don't know how high off the surface I am if I'm above 3,000 meters, which I am, which is going to make rendezvous and getting back into orbit a little bit more tricky. You can see the RCS jets firing. We want to get away from the CSM before we fire the main engine. RCS does not push other nearby craft. The main engines do. So you don't want to accidentally send this thing into a tumble. Probably wouldn't actually harm it that much, but it's still something I want to avoid. So I apologize if the video gets kind of jumpy here. As before, it's using a higher acceleration. The video is sped up more after the fact, because the landing itself, for a large portion, I mean, it's not that interesting to look at. I'm staring at the nav ball. So we're coming in, and just to review, for any successful landing, you want to kill your horizontal velocity. Now, normally, if I had all my views, I would burn completely horizontally, and then I'd switch to vertical, but because I don't have that, I was kind of following the retrograde indicator up, which is perfectly fine also. It just has the potential to be less fuel efficient. So I just rolled backwards to confirm. I'm intentionally facing the LM toward the 90-degree heading, so that later on when I have to rendezvous, I'll be able to see this the CSM coming up over the horizon, so I'll know when to take off. Alright, you saw down below the landing gear is extended. And we're just coming in very slowly. The radar altimeter is finally picked up. We're passing 1,000 feet. Passing 500. 4. So, you notice I have fine controls on, just very minute adjustments, keep the speed low. Coming in for the landing. Passing 100 feet. And we're on a nice, flat stretch of surface. That's pretty important. Because we don't want to tip over. I would have been so annoyed. The first time I did IVA to the moon and back, back in, I think, 0.7. The first time I came in for a landing, I couldn't see, we didn't have the pods back then. I couldn't see what I was landing on. I ended up landing on a huge hill and rolling over. The entire trip was a success, except it rolled over. This time, see where I'm coming in, happy with it, going in for a landing. And we have touchdown. Kerbal Space Center, the pod has landed. Alright, so we're going to do a quick EVA. I wish that flag planting had made it into this version, but wasn't ready. Alright, now we're going to get Bill out. Quick photo op. Hey, we went. Looking around, see if I can find Kerbal. Nope, it's over the horizon, so forgetting the ladder, just RCS. Back in. Alright, and now we're going to wait for our rendezvous. So fortunately, you can still engage targeting mode in IVA. None of this would be possible if you couldn't do that. we can do that. And fortunately, the pod is faced in the direction that the CSM is going to be orbiting from, so we're just using... Oh, completely blew by there. Alright, so slower time acceleration. Waiting for this thing to show up so we can target it. Don't want to miss it again. Particularly since if we're not on a perfectly equatorial orbit, every time we miss an orbit of this thing, we're actually... our landing site is actually further and further away from the orbital path, the ground track. So here we are. Liftoff. Just ejected the landing fuel tanks and landing structure, landing legs, so we can maximize delta V by minimizing mass. So first we're focusing on getting into orbit. Now I practiced this part a few times. Sometimes went better than others. This time, I don't know where my head was. I wasn't following proper, this is how you rendezvous. Normally that's, you get into an orbit, kill relative velocity, burn towards your target, kill relative velocity, burn towards your target, repeat until you're there. I kind of skipped the kill relative velocity part for a while, so I ended up using a lot more fuel than I really needed to for this rendezvous. It also took longer. So you can see I keep making a correcting burn, then seeing whether I'm getting further or closer, approaching or not approaching the CSM, and this goes on for a few minutes. I spread this part of the video up because, again, it's a little bit boring. Unfortunately, it means I'm moving the mouse around a lot, so it gets a little bit jerky. Alright, now finally, after I've burned through most of my fuel supply, I finally realized kill, relative velocity, then point at him. So I'm almost out of main engine fuel, but fortunately I'm in orbit, and I'm reasonably close to the CSM, only about 5 kilometers away. The main engine is about to kick it. Killing relative velocity here. Okay, so where is it? I'm only about 5 kilometers away. Engine's out of fuel. So now we engage RCS, which, given the lower speeds of a moon orbit versus orbiting in Kerbal, RCS can actually do a larger portion of the rendezvous with RCS, because you need to change your velocity a much smaller amount. So there we are, opened up the resources to keep an eye on monopropellant. I have plenty left. It's not really going to be an issue. So, still approaching. Alright, now what I'm doing is pointing... Alright, so I pointed the LM at 180 degrees. So I know the orientation of the LM. So now we switch to the CSM, which is going to do the rendezvous and dock, the final rendezvous, which is also how it happens in the Apollo program. So, just using RCS, bring it in the last half kilometer nice and slow. And again, docking in IVA, if you know the orientation of the docking port you're trying to get to, not difficult at all to do in IVA. So we're coming up. We're only 60 meters away. You can see the LM. I forgot to retract the ladder before I took off. So now we're dropping under it. Okay, bringing it in. Again, the secret to docking, IVA or whatever, it's just once you get close, take it slow, use RCS, don't rush yourself. So I'm rotating to face the opposite direction that this, the LM is, because of course I want them to meet nose to nose. Alright, so We are off in front of it. Now we're going to begin the approach. You can see the target indicator, my heading indicator, and the prograde indicator are not yet aligned. So if I tried to dock, the graph would bump, nothing would happen. So what I need to do is get that purple target indicator to match exactly along my heading, which I'm doing with RCS. Okay, so now that's pretty much matched. So now I just need to bring the velocity indicator align with those two. And I have fine controls enabled for this. For most RCS motion, regular controls are fine, but for fine docking movements, turn on fine controls, default caps lock key, make your life a lot easier. Alright, so my heading is pretty much aligned with the target indicator, which is pretty much aligned with the velocity indicator. So at this point, we're just about ready to head in for the final docking maneuver. See, we're 8 meters away. Everything is lined up. Not quite perfectly, but good enough. And then in a minute, we're going to turn off RCS and SAS. There it goes. And let the magnetism dock there. So we are docked. CSM is rendezvoused. Okay, so we're going to transfer Bill and Jeb back over, and as before, we've turned off the HUD, so we don't actually know our exact altitude with that digital readout. Of course, at this point, I know I'm within 100 kilometers of the moon's surface, so you can just read it off that analog dial. If I was really interested, but fortunately, we're really past needing that at this point. We're in orbit. All we have left is the trans-Kerbal injection. Excuse me, burn, injection, whatever. So once these guys get back in orbit, they're back aboard the CSM. Let's do a quick check to make sure they're all there. I kid you not, at one of my tests, one of the test missions before I recorded this, I forgot one of them on the CSM. Excuse me, I forgot one of them on the LM, and I deorbited it in that time, that attempt. So I accidentally smashed, I think it was Bob, into the surface of the moon, which is why he is not on this mission. He is dead. Alright, so there goes the lunar module. Now, similar to when we were going to the moon, we're going to point north, so at our side window is going to face our prograde and face our direction of travel, so we can see the Earth rise. Now, unlike when we're orbiting Kerbal, we don't actually want to burn when we first see Kerbal. Yep. Because we're orbiting along a 90-degree direction, we want to burn about halfway in orbit around Kerbal rise. But there's a lot of margin for error here. Fortunately, high G loads aren't in the game yet. You can't kill your Kerbals, so I don't have to worry about accelerating too much here. I'll just hit the planet more or less speed. Once re-entry gets added, we'll have to do a more precise return burn, but it's simply not an issue right now. So we're actually have done all the burns. We're now, you see our SOI just switched. We are just falling back to Kerbal right now. This mission is all but over. Rotate so we can see it. Time warp. Go faster, make the video shorter. Alright, here we come. Now, ideally, when you're returning from the moon, you want to put your periapsis somewhere around 30 kilometers. That's low enough that you'll aero brake in one orbit, but not so high that you'll get high G loads. You can see the G loads are peaking because the periapsis is somewhere under the surface. We're essentially just slamming into this planet. So the parachutes are deployed. and we're coming in for an ocean landing. Radar altimeter picked up. Passing 400 feet. Parachutes deploy soon. No, I think they already deployed. Alright, so this was an Apollo-style mission to the moon and back, completely in IVA. This is Kerbal Space Program. Fly safe.